Welcome to Book Time with Ryan. I am Ryan, and today I'll be talking about Susan Ronald's The Ambassador. This is Joseph P. Kennedy at the court of St. James's, 1938 to 1940. I knew a little bit about Joe Kennedy. He was the first chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States. He was also the first chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission, and he was an ambassador. I also knew that he had a few children. I didn't realize he had 9 children. This book covers a pretty rocky period in world history. This is the lead up and the start of World War II. Pretty bad war. During this time, Joe Kennedy was the ambassador in London for the United States. Pretty important time to be in Europe. Pretty important time to be in the United Kingdom. Last chapter, the epilogue really is about kind of where the Kennedy family went, and it's been cemented as a recognizable family name, obviously in the United States. Lots of tragedy surrounds them, and the final really small portion of this book goes into some of the things that happened to these people. Wow. But for the most part, we're hearing about Joe Kennedy and his desire to promote himself and his family, the Kennedys. He wanted to be the first Catholic U.S. president. He wasn't. It was really downhill after he was the ambassador. But that was his desire. And if he couldn't be it, then he wanted his sons to be. First, Joe Jr., although when Joe Jr. died, then it kind of passed on to John F. Kennedy, who did become the first Catholic U.S. president. So Joe worked on FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's campaign for president. And as a reward, he was eventually selected to be the ambassador to the court of St. James's. I don't know what the court of St. James's is. That's never explained, but it's synonymous with being the ambassador. So if you look at 1938 to 1940, really important time in world history. This is the run-up and the start of World War II. This book really touches on so much of the appeasement, and really, it's frustrating when you're reading it month by month, and you're seeing how often European nations allowed Germany and Hitler, Nazis, to move forward with the invasion of Czechoslovakia, Poland, Austria, Kristallnacht, and going after Jews, eventually concentration camps and death camps. But this touches on some of that, but not all the way. What we're seeing here in this book is more of Joe Kennedy's relationship with FDR, Joe Kennedy's relationship with some of the people in London that he has to work with, his counterparts, some of the other ambassadors in the U.S. government, in Paris and Italy, his desire to have a connection with the Holy See, which is the Vatican, and being a representative of the U.S. government to the Vatican, because he's Catholic. It was really important for him. Eventually, this is Pope Pius XII, who I think a lot of people believe was a little too lenient on the Nazis. I wouldn't say directly supporting, but not as outspoken as you would hope for a pope to be, and the kind of evil that was being perpetrated by Nazi Germany. The general tone is that Joe Kennedy was doing this for himself. He was doing it for himself, trying to promote himself, possibly running for president in 1940, which he doesn't do. But if not for him, then for his sons, for the future Kennedys. And the Kennedy family was a tight family that kept everything in the family. Although there are some pretty disturbing moments where family members really either betray or abandon family. The one that I was really surprised about, Kathleen Kennedy, wanted to marry an Anglican marquis who was going to be the Duke of something, and it would have taken some kind of proclamation from, I guess, the Vatican, so she was not excommunicated from the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. And her mom kind of like disowned her because of this. And she wanted to marry the love of her life. She eventually did. And 4 months later, he died serving England in World War II. But her mom had this multiple day fight with her as she was looking at somebody else that she was considering marrying, that she had fallen in love with. And while they were traveling, the plane that was carrying Kick crashed and she was killed. Which is, as a parent, I can't imagine. I mean, she didn't know her daughter was going to die, but then even when her daughter died, she didn't go to the funeral. And once she offered up a prayer, it was basically a prayer for somebody in purgatory because she was wrong. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know, but I'm Protestant. Joe Kennedy is not a career State Department official. He's not a career diplomat, and it shows a lot of his actions are about appeasement. He's also fairly pro-fascist and anti-Semitic. He appreciates the Chamberlain approach to appeasement, and eventually when Winston Churchill takes over as prime minister, he has much harder time doing anything. He's really kind of sidelined. He also was vulgar, which I'm okay with. But I guess probably not in the circles he was in. It probably wasn't appropriate to speak the way he did. And it was sometimes directed at FDR or other high officials, including Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State. You see a pretty quick deterioration of Joe Kennedy's relationship with other members of the U.S. government, also members of the British government in London. His kind of sloppy, amateur approach to foreign relations and to intelligence gathering and to just kind of being aware of the whole situation. And that was also something that hurt the rest of the federal government in the United States. But you also see that FDR kept Joe Kennedy in London probably longer than a lot of people would have, because Joe was less of a threat for FDR's reelection campaign for 1940, his third term. And he's the only president that's ever had 4 terms. So when he was running for his third term, it was just easier to have Joe Kennedy away from the United States and interfering as little as possible. By the end of it, Joe Kennedy is just so angry that he's been sidelined. He feels like they're having meetings without him. He doesn't know what's going on. He looks kind of pathetic. He's talking about how every speech it seemed like he was making, he was talking about the downfall of the British Empire and how if Germany turned on England, they would never last. Even while they're being bombed during the Blitz, he's still reiterating the fact that once Germany really wants to punish Britain, there won't be a Britain left. Not probably the best talking points for somebody who's the ambassador to a country. Eventually, he's recalled for consultation, and it's really given him a chance to step down. He says that he's for FDR's campaign for his third term, but also Joe Kennedy's spouting a lot of pretty negative stuff about Jews in the United States, about the chances for France and for Britain, and about FDR and FDR's kind of cabinet and leadership cadre. Joe Kennedy does not come away from this book looking very good. And really, a lot of the Kennedys don't. And the Kennedys that don't survive. it's not a total indictment of JFK. I was surprised at how sick John F. Kennedy was often while he was growing up. And I had never heard about Kathleen Kennedy, Kick, and how much she was liked. But otherwise, I don't think this. If you're a Kennedy fan, if they're high on your list of great people, of great families, I don't think you're going to enjoy this book. That does not mean that it's not accurate or not true, although this is the only one I read. But it does not leave Joe Kennedy or the Kennedys in general in a good light. And it was a difficult time for U.S. relations, a difficult time for Americans understanding what was going on in Europe and how that would expand and eventually involve the United States. A difficult time between appeasement, isolationists, and kind of people pushing for war and pushing for Lend-Lease agreements and support of Britain. This is also a time period where people were afraid of communism. So even though the Soviet Union was leaning towards going against Germany, although they did sign a non-aggression pact, which Germany eventually violated, there were a lot of other countries, democracies, that did not want to engage with the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin, not a good guy. Hitler, not a good guy. It was kind of, do you pick the lesser of two evils, or do you just stay out of it and see what happens? And eventually we get World War II. But this book really kind of ends in 1940 until the epilogue, where we get a little more information about what happened with Joe Kennedy later and what happened with each of his kids. Kind of the Kennedy curse. And it's a pretty interesting look for really the person that made a lot of the future Kennedy success possible, who had difficulties of his own. Not the least of which was cheating on his wife frequently, which may have, I don't know if it was more common back then, but it seemed to be a thing that many of the Kennedys had a problem with. And this book also comments on their libidos, so it doesn't shy away from much. The author, Susan Ronald, was born and raised in the United States and is a British-American biographer and historian and author. And she lives in an English village with her husband. So I think she does a good job of talking about this. That one of the confusing things I would say is I do not understand British titles. I don't understand. Here's an example. This guy, this is one of the names. Just so many names and titles. Viscount Robert Arthur James Gascoigne Cecil Cranbourne. Besides the Viscount, those are all his names. He was the 5th Marquis of Salisbury on the death of his father in 1947, but he was known as Bobbity. He's got 6 names. He's a Viscount, and he's going to become the Marquis of Salisbury. 6 names. And people just call him Bobbity. People's names change, what they're the Duke of, what their names are. It's so confusing. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I can't follow it. There's kind of a guide in the back to people's names so you can understand some of the characters. Well, it's nonfiction, so real people. But it's one of the things that confuses me when people are, and I don't know the levels of titles. So they're like, this is the Viceroy, Viscount, Countess, Marquis, Archduke. I don't know. I don't know who's where and what. But I will say this. My wife has a count in her family way back somewhere. And in Spain. So not a count anymore, but so at one point I did look up titles, but because I'm going to assume count. once I found that out. My wife told me that she told me that before, but that's not something I'd forget. When your relative says like, "Oh, I had somebody in my family that had a title in another country that's Count," that's not something I would forget. I give it 5 stars. It was an interesting read. Probably not the most positive read for an American, but I'm all about history, the ugly and the beautiful stuff. So this is just one of those examples, I think, of maybe the less positive stories and just learning more about some pretty important periods in our history. So thanks for being here today. If you like the Kennedys, if you dislike the Kennedys, if you're interested in any kind of information about World War II or the lead up to World War II and diplomacy, check out The Ambassador. And I will talk to you later.